Up all across the fruited plains of the internet. And I know it's a Saturday, but I woke up and I was not expecting to get the transcripts from Friday afternoon hot into the inbox. And I did. Last night they showed up and they were just sizzling there. And I was just antsy as can be to take a look at them and say what's going on inside. I know there are CIA agents and I might have cracked them open a little bit, but not without you. And so I just, wanted to do this together. And so it's Saturday. I know normally we don't spend time here on Saturdays, but it is Sussman Durham trial season. And so we've got a lot to attend to. And because we only have one afternoon session, it's only a Friday afternoon session. This is what we did not have yesterday when we wrapped up day 5. It's actually not going to be all that much. If you take a look at the transcripts, you see this one here. If you look up in the corner, I believe you can see it. It's only 97 pages. And so that's like, we can do that in our sleep here after what we went through last week. Many of these, 197 pages just for a morning session, and we would do 2 of those. So we can really sink some time into this. But it is Saturday, and I hope everybody's having an amazing start to your weekend. As we usually do here, let's get started by getting our bearing straight on the mind map before we dive into it. And here is what we're looking at. So the mind map continues to grow. Yesterday, we spent a lot of time on day 4, sort of wrapping up with James Baker, former counsel to the FBI, general counsel over there. And James Baker is somebody who is sort of he's sort of a good witness for both sides. He's a friend of Michael Sussman. The defense asked him a lot of questions and got a lot of good stuff out of him. Like, he really trusted Sussman, right? There was this credibility chain that James Baker went through, and the defense led him through this. They said, oh, he's got this qualification, right? Yeah. National security this, yeah. And counterintelligence this, and he worked for this candidate and this candidate and this candidate, didn't he? And James Baker's like, yes, very credible, very respected, all very good testimony. But there was some bad stuff for the defense. They repeatedly tried to get him to say that his memory was bad and he didn't remember. And he actually navigated that pretty well. He said 100%, I am certain this is what Michael Sussman told me. And the defense was trying to break that apart and say he was only refreshed by the notes that came from Tricia Anderson and Bill Priestep. But he didn't let him get away with that. He said, no, yeah, I did look at the notes, but they only refreshed my recollection, kind of a thing. And then they triggered the memory. In other words, the notes didn't implant or insert the memory. They just triggered the memory, and then he remembered, and he was 100% certain. So that turned out to be, pretty good testimony, actually, for the Durham prosecution. And the defense spent a lot of time talking about some of the procedural errors, saying, Jim, you really screwed this up when you didn't call for another agent to come in here and take notes and all of that. And so that, of course, was a really critical part of this case. James Baker, it was the guy who actually met with Michael Sussman. Of course, this is Michael Sussman, the real high level here, being charged, indicted for lying to the FBI. And he actually met with James Baker on that one day back in September of 2016. Now, we've spent a lot of time talking about this meeting, the one between Michael Sussman and James Baker. And it actually is just sort of one piece of this whole puzzle. You see down here, there's the CIA component as well. And we're going to spend time today talking about this. There were 2 agents, or one sort of an ex-agent. The other is a bona fide retired CIA agent. And so they both testified Friday afternoon. Sounds like coming up next week, we're going to hear from these 2 people. Tricia Anderson and Bill Priestep are both going to be 2 former or ex-FBI officials. One deputy director, other deputy general counsel. They're going to be testifying next week. And so we'll get into all of that and more. But the CIA stuff, let's get our bearing straight on that. I started filling this out today. And so yesterday, recall, we spent the latter part of the show, part 2, going through all of Robbie Mook's testimony, which came out the morning of Friday, which was the 20th, yesterday. And, a lot of his testimony was okay. He did a lot of the same stuff that Mark Elias did. I don't remember this, and I don't recall. And I was a big campaign. It was a $1 billion organization, and I'm really not sure about how all the different components worked, and I have no idea. Nobody knew anything. But we did dial in on the Trump-Russia collusion hoax story, because eventually this did bubble up to his level. He was the campaign manager for Hillary Clinton. And so the big decisions, they sort of run through him and then ultimately through her. And yesterday, when the prosecutor was sort of breaking him down a little bit, they got into this and they said, all right, look, Fusion GPS concocted this stupid story about Trump-Russia collusion. They passed it over to Perkins Coie, which was the law firm where Michael Sussman worked, Mark Elias, and everybody else who's all sort of in the Clinton inner circle, people like John Podesta, Jake Sullivan, Jennifer Palmieri, and of course, Robbie Mook. They all had to decide what to do with this dossier, with this white paper that apparently indicted Donald Trump as being a pawn of Russia. What happened? What are we going to do about this? Well, Robbie Mook in the testimony yesterday said that when they ran this up through old Hillary over there, this is what he said, if you missed this. And so let's pull this up. This is on the mind map. He says, prosecutor asks, and you made that decision with the people you referenced, right? About whether to take this to the media. Robbie Mook said, correct. We discussed it and we made that decision. Question from the prosecutor is, who was the highest member of the campaign who either was involved or approved that decision to take it to the media? Robbie says, well, John and I were involved. I discussed it with Hillary as well, but I believe I discussed it with her after we kind of already made the decision. And the prosecutor says, wait, so you told Miss Clinton we want to give this to the media? Mook says, I don't really remember the substance of the conversation, but notionally the discussion was, hey, we have this and we want to share it with a reporter. And how did Miss Clinton respond? She agreed to that. Whoa, that was like, oh my goodness, that's approval. That's direct approval from Hillary Clinton wanting to take what we now know is an entirely fake dossier, fake scam in order to create this October surprise, actually checked off by Hillary, which of course she would, right? What is that surprising to anybody? No, of course not. What is surprising is that her campaign manager just acknowledged that under oath in a federal criminal trial. And so Godspeed, Robbie Mook, and good luck to you, sir. But he was where we left off yesterday morning after the lunch break. He was done, had cross-examinations. The transcript for all of those are up here. And actually, I don't think I have those up yet. I'll post those after the show. And then after he was done, Robbie Mook, we have these two people. So Mark Chadason, we're going to learn more about him, and Kevin P., we're going to learn more about him. Both of these guys were involved in the CIA, and we already connected them back to the sort of the secondary meeting that Michael Sussman had. So, we've got a lot to get to, as you can see, and this is continuing to be very dynamic. I want to give some quick shout outs to some of the super chats that came in, because this all goes to support the Transcript Fund. These transcripts are not cheap, right? I explained that these are $1.20 every page, whether it's redacted or not. We got to pay for it. And so we wouldn't be able to do this without your support. I mean, really, it's going to cost several $1,000s to get all of these. And even though I'm interested in this trial, this wouldn't be something that I would just sort of get on a Sunday for leisurely reading. And so we can really have a lot of fun together, and it's possible because of your support. So thank you for that. Big shout outs to Anthony Henson with a dono today. May Be Sunshine. Rolf Peterson became a member, Maybe Sunshine also with the super chat. Rolf Peterson's a member, welcome. And Kirk Sullivan said, really appreciate your coverage. I'm very interested in pre-step. Did the information being bogus get to Bill before or after Strzok started a CI investigation? I would love to know. Well, the good news is apparently he's scheduled for Monday or Tuesday. So we are going to learn a lot more from Bill. And as Kirk is mentioning, right, Bill's going to be a pretty key component in this whole thing because of his notes. Bill, if you take a look at the mind map, the notes from Bill are, very important. He says here, said not doing this for any client. When he wrote that down, this was the reference. This was sort of a recollection of what James Baker told him because James Baker didn't take any notes when he met with Michael Sussman. Give me a break. Okay. So, all right, without any further ado, we are now getting into transcript mode. And what I've done for the day, after we get into the intro, I have a little new feature I'm excited to share with you. But let's take a look at what we've got. Afternoon session, Friday, May 20th, 1:51 p.m. And so kind of coming back from a late lunch there. And everybody's back in the house. Remember, Mr. Keelty was gone on family leave. The prosecutors were down a person. He had a family emergency, gone for a little bit, wasn't sure if he was coming back, and he's back. And the judge actually mentions that today, says, welcome back, Mr. Keelty, hope you're all right. And they just kind of, move on past it. But we'll see. We've got Mark Chadason, I referenced previously, and then Kevin P. And I forgot to mention this, but before we get into Kevin P was kind of outed by the prosecutor a little bit. Recall this. I made a note of this because it was kind of one of those things like, where did I put that? Here, the prosecutor, if you recall, there was sort of an outing that took place. When they were talking about a scheduling issue, we saw this pop up. Mr. DeFilippis is saying, Your Honor, we have a scheduling issue. So Kevin P., who is scheduled to testify with the CIA, has a family issue. Parents are in failing health, so they wanted to bump him up further. And he says, I think the defense agrees that's no problem. So we could do Mr. Peter or Mr. Pierce or Mr. I don't know what it is, right? He says on Friday. And then the judge says, this is not good, and actually calls him to sort of get on the phone. And they get on the phone, and the judge is like, I think you said his name. And then the court clerk redacted the whole thing. So the name's been said. The jurors have heard the name. Whether, it's consequential to anything, I don't know. But Kevin P., we're going to learn, is retired. He's ex-CIA, and he's got parents in failing health. So thoughts and prayers for Kevin P.'s parents. And I'm not joking about that. All right. So, Your Honor, ready for the jury? They just got lunch. Judge Cooper says, yes, ma'am, I'll bring them on in. Court says, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I hope everyone had a nice lunch. We are now back in the government's case in chief because remember, yesterday, Robbie Mook was actually a defense witness because Robbie Mook has something else going on. I forget what that was, vacation or something. But the defense we changed hats a little bit. Yesterday, we went into the defense case and the cross-examination came from the prosecutor. And so we sort of were playing the opposite. But we're now back in the government case in chief, and we've got the last two witnesses for the day. Mr. Al Gore is now going to be the prosecutor who is handling this line of questioning. Says, all right, we call Mark Chadason. Judge says, step right up, sir. Please remain standing, raise your right hand, and he is sworn in. He spells his name. Sir, what kind of work do you do? He says, I'm the CEO of a small tech consulting company. And where did you work before that? I was employed at the Central Intelligence Agency. And is that known as the CIA? It is the CIA, they say. Al Gore says, in early 2017, what was your employment at that time? Rewinding the clock, this is many years ago, said I had a small private company, which court clerk can't hear it. Says, sir, can you sit closer to the microphone, please? And the witness is like, I'm sorry. I used to work at the CIA. I don't know how these things work. He said, I'm sorry. I have a small private company, a consulting company. And did there come a time when you came to speak with an individual named Michael Sussman? Says, yes, I did. When was that? He says, January 31st, 2017, which would have been after the meeting with Michael Sussman. Between Michael Sussman and the FBI. He just had the meeting here, but the FBI meeting with Michael Sussman was before that. This was in September of 2016. And did you know Sussman before that? Chadason says, I did not. And so what were the circumstances and how you came to met Sussman? Oh, and I forgot to turn on our feature. Let's turn on this feature here. That is Mark Chadason, just so we can remember who we're talking about here. Says, and what were the circumstances and how you came to meet Sussman? He says, I was called by a friend of mine named Gilman Louie, who asked me to have a meeting with Mr. Sussman. Gilman and I were colleagues. We both sat on the board of a CIA Officers Memorial Foundation. Oh, that sounds nice. And what was your first interaction with Sussman? He says, I believe we had breakfast one day at a hotel somewhere in Virginia, and that was on January 31st? That's correct. What, if anything, did Sussman say about whether he knew whether you had previously worked for the CIA? Did he know that you worked there? He says, I believe Gilman told him that I was a retired CIA officer, and you met with Sussman at the hotel, is that right? In a restaurant there. And approximately how long was that meeting? About an hour, hour and a half maybe. And what did Sussman say about what he wanted to meet you for? He said Sussman had some allegations, I guess, against President Trump. He wanted me to hear about it. And what did Sussman ask you to do during that meeting? He said he wanted to have a meeting with a senior CIA active duty person and asked me if I could make that happen. And did Sussman say whether he was there on behalf of anyone else? He said he was there on behalf of a client. Yes. Well, that's interesting. Well, so that means that Michael Sussman can be very specific. When he's there on behalf of a client, he can actually say, I'm here on behalf of a client. When he's not there on behalf of a client or lying about being there on behalf of a client, he can say, I'm not there on behalf of a client, which is what he did in this case, allegedly. Prosecutor says, and what, if anything, did Sussman say regarding whether he had shared anything regarding the allegations with anyone else? Did he tell anything about this Trump saga to anyone else? Chadason says, he said he did speak to the Office of General Counsel at the CIA and was told to talk to the FBI. CIA is like, get out of here. And he said he knew someone at the FBI, but did not want to talk to the FBI, or his client did not trust the FBI, or his client did not believe that the FBI had the necessary tools to deal with the allegation. Well, that's interesting because he had already met with Sussman at that time. I'm sorry, Sussman had already met with the FBI prior to this. And it sounds right. So at this point, it sort of sounds Trump has already won the election. The election's over, and Trump is sworn in because this is now January. What's the meeting date on this? Dang it. January 31st. Yeah, so Trump's already in office. He is now the actual president. And Sussman's still meeting with the CIA, confirming it's on behalf of a client this time. Okay, says, so did Mr. Sussman say anything regarding what he would do if the CIA didn't take his meeting? Did he say he was going to do something one way or another? He said that his client was prepared to go to the New York Times if the CIA wasn't prepared to meet, which sounds like a little bit of a threat. Either you meet with us, CIA, or we're going to the media. And after you met, after that, hour and a half meeting with Sussman, what'd you do in response to that meeting? Chadason says, after the meeting, I wrote down my notes. I called a friend of mine who is a senior officer, and I provided her with a memo of the conversation. Prosecutor said, oh, a memo. Perfect. I'd like to bring up Exhibit 809, please, and I'll go ahead and wait for your glasses. Chadason is sort of fumbling around with his glasses, and, oh, sorry, he says. No problem. Take your time. Says, this is a little blurry here. Says, do you see the name at the top of this exhibit? I do. And what, Your Honor, we would move the exhibit to be admitted. No objection from the defense, so moved, and it's in. Al Gore says, all right, let's turn over to page 4 here. Can we blow up the top part? Chadason, you testified that you had written a report following your meeting with Sussman, right? Yes. And you also testified that the meeting on January 31st happened, right? Yes. And so at the top, is this the memo that you just mentioned previously? Yes, it is. Perfect. Can we take that down? Let's put up the top part of the memo, please. And it happens. Mr. Chadason, can you read the first paragraph? He says, okay. On January 31st, 2017, Mark Chadason was virtually deleted space introduced by the former CEO of Inqtel, INQTEL, Gilman Louis, to Michael Sussman. Sussman is a partner at Perkins Coie and is in charge of the privacy and data security practice, IoT, consumer privacy, computer and network intrusions, IoT-related investigations, surveillance and regulatory compliance, and national security issues. Sussman claimed to have a TC, SCI, and IC badge. That's the first paragraph. And that's details, man. That's a lot of details. So they did meet for an hour and a half, but he wrote down everything, the CIA agent. Maybe they are pretty good. I don't know. He says, so in this introductory paragraph, you're just basically setting the stage of the individual that you just met with, right? Yeah. And could you go down to the second paragraph, please? He says, yeah, this paragraph refers to Gilman Louis, right? Yes, it does. And Gilman Louis, Chadason, can you tell me who that is again? He says, yeah, it's the CEO of Inqtel. Inqtel was a CIA organization that dealt with private industry. And he also sits on the board of the CIA Officers Memorial Foundation about 9 years. In the next paragraph, asks the prosecutor, it starts with, quote, the story. Can you read that, please? The story. He says, sure. Sussman said that he represents a client who does not want to be known, but had some interesting information redacted. Prosecutor says, and that's your recollection from what Mr. Sussman had told you on that meeting. Is that right? He says, yeah, that's correct. All right, turn to the next page, please. Can you read the first sentence after the word client? And Chadason says, the client. Sussman would not provide client's identity and was not sure if the client would reveal himself to the CIA, but he would provide data sets supporting his claims, which could be verified. Prosecutor says, and then right after that, can you read the next sentence, please? Chadason was able to elicit that the client is an engineer with a number of patents and is most likely a contractor to the IC, the intelligence community. As Sussman claimed, the client had deleted various projects. The client has worked with the IC before. Sussman also said client is a Republican. Whoa! The client's a Republican? Well, that can't be Rodney Jaffe. We all know he wanted to be pleasing to the VIPs. Is there an inside mole there? Who's the Republican who's working with Michael Sussman, the IC? I don't know. I don't know who it is. Who could it be? Is it Lindsey Graham? Probably. All right, let's see. Mr. Al Gore, the prosecutor asks. Take that down, please. Okay, Mr. Chadason, so is that the sum and substance of what Mr. Sussman provided to you? He says, yeah, to the best of my recollection. And do you remember him identifying anyone regarding this or just maintaining that it was just his client? He says, no, he didn't identify anyone. Okay, let's go on to the next paragraph. And let's start with the first sentence. Can you read that? He says, Chadason asked if Sussman has, and this is the CIA, the ex-CIA agent writing this now. He's sort of talking in the third person, saying Chadason asked if. He's reading his report. Asked if Sussman had provided this data to the FBI. And initially, he said he knew Jim Traynor, NFI, no further information. Well, that's interesting. You know, you kind of want to know that if you're the CIA. Hey, did you take this to the FBI? Did they laugh you out of here before we take this? Because if they did, then maybe we're not going to vet it. Why are you wasting our time with this? Right? Oftentimes, this will happen with legal cases. We don't practice personal injury cases or medical malpractice, but there are some incidents where they'll say, you know, if one medical malpractice attorney rejects you, it's almost like don't tell the next medical malpractice attorney, because they'll say, oh, somebody else rejected you. You must have a terrible case. Don't waste my time with it, right? There's sort of that idea that that type of thing might happen. Same thing might happen here. You know, if you've got a really, really terrible set of data that the FBI looked at and said, this is not legitimate, then why are you bringing it to us? And it sounds like Sussman may have lied, right? Because he did actually sit down with Jim Baker and pass the information off. Jim Baker is not Jim Traynor. Chadason continues to read. He says the FBI had then claimed that his client did not want to provide this to the FBI. And as he knows that the FBI did not have the resources to deal with these issues, okay, because of the FBI, and perhaps since Sussman is openly a Democrat and openly told Chadason that he does a lot of work for the DNC, did not trust the FBI, right? And so they were angry at the FBI back then because they feel like James Comey screwed him when he sort of reopened the investigation, and, you know, Hillary is extremely careless or whatever he did to try to not charge her. Here, another question from the prosecutor starts. And you started out that you had asked Sussman whether he provided that to the FBI. You asked him that specifically, right? I did. Why did you ask him that question? He says, well, you know, this was a matter of both domestic and foreign issues. I was wondering if the FBI was dealing with the domestic part of it. And when Mr. Sussman explained that there was a lack of trust with the FBI, was he referring to himself or the client? You recall? He didn't trust you or the client didn't trust you? Says, I believe, to the best of my recollection, he was referring to the client. All right, why don't you skip down a couple paragraphs there, Mark? Hop on here. He says, you mentioned earlier that Sussman had told you that he tried to reach out to the CIA. Is that correct? That is correct. And then if you could read the next paragraph, it says Sussman said that. He says, Sussman said that with the CIA general counsel, NFI, before she retired NFI, and she told him he should contact the FBI. So in other words, yes, he did try to go to the FBI. They said, go to the CIA, which is obviously not true, because he did, as we just heard from Jim Baker, actually meet with the FBI. And a lot of this was vetted. Prosecutor says, okay, read the next one. He says, Sussman said that his client would most likely only provide the data to a senior bona fide CIA officers who are on active duty. And if there's no interest, he would most likely just go to the New York Times, either the CIA, you do something with this, or else. Prosecutor says, you know, you've mentioned NFI a few times. You said it once. What does that stand for? He says, no further information available to me. On to the second paragraph. I think you testified earlier, your memory, and what you wrote down here is that Sussman said that if the CIA didn't look at this, he's going to take it to the New York Times. That's your recollection? That is my recollection. All right, turn it over. First paragraph on this one. Can you explain to the jury, what are you writing about here? And Mark says, I was writing about Mr. Sussman's background. He's an experienced attorney. He had clearances. He had experiences with the intelligence community. He dealt with all kinds of people, and his allegation would not have unsubstantial allegations. Prosecutor says, in the second line there, it says, of IC experience. He sees a lot of quacks and unsubstantial allegations. Do you recall him saying that to you, or is that your own words? And Chadason says, it's probably a summary of my own words, a summary of what he said. Seeing a lot of quacks and unsubstantial allegations. And then in the last line, it says, he cares about the security of the country and wanted the IC to know. He says, what does IC mean? And he's explaining this all to the jurors. The ex-CIA official, Chadason, says it's the intelligence community. And do you recall Mr. Sussman saying that to you? Did he say IC to you? Yes, yeah, I do. And pull down the last one. Can you pull up the Sussman bio, please? Mr. Chadason, this is in your memo as well. Can you explain to the jury why you put this in your memo? He says, when I wrote the memo, I put some context to the person that I was sending the memo to. So in order for the person to understand who Mr. Sussman was, I was providing background so they can make a better judgment that they wanted to meet Mr. Sussman or not in the memo. This is his bio. This is who he is. This is what he does. All right, so let's go back to the first page of this exhibit. There's a series of email exchanges that you had with other people. Is that right? Yeah. And there's an email you sent back on February 7th. Is that true? Yes. And it starts with Stephen. Can you just read that, please? Sure. Stephen, Michael redacted, the probably last name, Michael or email, I don't know what that is. I don't know what they redacted. Stephen, Michael redacted me and said he returned from Amsterdam. He's looking forward to speaking with someone ASAP. I think the longer we wait, the murkier the waters get with his source. That is, who else he will speak to in frustration. Uh-oh. So meaning that if we don't talk to him soon, this is an email. If we don't talk to him soon, he's going to go to the media. Prosecutor says, hang on. Stop right there. Stop reading. Let me stop you there. What did you mean by that? Chadason says that if this is a bona fide lead, the source goes to the New York Times, this thing's no longer going to be valid. Like, we've got to act or else it's going to be ruined. Now, you use the term murkier as well. What did you mean by that? He says, I think I was trying to say that it's not going to be, I mean, if the information is public, it's difficult to have any sort of intelligence. And then it's indiscernible again. And the court reporter's like, Mark, I already told you once before. You got to speak into the microphone. He says, I'm sorry, I missed the last word. Okay, and then the witness says again, if the information becomes public, it's going to be more difficult to have intelligence operations or anything like that. They pull down another document and they go back to the top. All right, Mr. Chadason, what's the date of this email you see here? That was back on February 7th, 2017. And remember, we have another date that's sort of another anchor date for us. The anchor date is the March 7th meeting. There was a March 7th meeting that took place here on the mind map. You see this. After Donald Trump is elected, he's sworn into office. He has a meeting with his acting attorney general, Dana Boente, and they all are sitting around. So there's a transition taking place. You know, the outgoing Obama FBI is leaving. They're packing their bags and sort of crying on the White House lawn. And then the incoming Trump administration is now trying to get a handoff. And they have this meeting back on March 7th, 2017. And at that meeting, all of the people are like, do you remember that one time that Michael Sussman met with the FBI and he told them the first thing that when he sat down, he said, I'm working for Hillary Clinton. It's nice to meet you. Remember that? And they're all like, yeah, I remember it happened exactly like that. And it turns out, you know, that didn't obviously happen. But now they're trying to sort of paper over this thing because in the Saturday before this March 7th meeting, Donald Trump got on Twitter and says, hey, I know all about what you guys have done now. And they started to hit the panic button a little bit. So that's sort of another anchor date. Okay, so we're talking about stuff that might be leading up to that date as well. We get close to the end of the direct exam of Mr. Chadason. They pull down another email. They say, do you know whether Sussman ever met with anyone at the CIA? He says, I received an email on February 8th stating that they did make contact. That was the last time I ever heard of the matter. And did you ever hear anything regarding the meeting the CIA had with Sussman? I did not. And did you ever speak with Mr. Sussman again following the January 31st meeting? I don't believe so. No. All right, sir. Thank you very much. That's from Mr. Al Gore, the prosecutor who is calling Chadason the ex-CIA official. And so what do we get out of there? Well, we get sort of a string of connections to the CIA that sort of mirror what was taking place in the FBI, but he actually did communicate that he was there on behalf of a client. So we get Bosworth now, who is the defense attorney representing Michael Sussman, and he comes out, he's ready for some cross-examination. And he says, good afternoon, Mr. Chadason. We've never met before, have we? No. I want to ask you a few questions about how you came to meet with Sussman. I think you said initially you spoke with a person named Gilman Louie. And who is Gilman Louie? He said he's a friend and a fellow board member at the CIA Officers Memorial Foundation. Oh, that sounds nice. What is that? He says it's a foundation which raises funds for the survivors of officers who've been killed in action or for spouses and children to put them through college, providing education to spouses and benefits which are not generally given to CIA officers. It is nice. And how long had you all worked together on the board of the foundation? Talking specifically Chadason and Gilman Louie. About 9 years. And so he was someone you trusted? Yeah. And how did it work? I mean, what did he say to you to see if you'd be willing to meet with Sussman, since Gilman is going to be setting this whole thing up? And Chadason says, to the best of my memory, because this happened about 5 years ago, I received communication that he wanted to meet with a friend of his, or wanted me to meet with a friend of his. I says, I'm paraphrasing. I would take some time and meet with him, because he may have something of some importance to national security, something like that. I'm paraphrasing. And the court says, Mark, good Lord, man. I'm sorry, sir. Could you please move a little closer to the microphone? Third time. Witness says, I'm sorry, I'm paraphrasing. I don't have notes in front of me. So Bosworth says, Was that a conversation you had on the phone or in person with Mr. Louie? Can you remember this? He says, it was a SMS app. I think it was text, best I can recall. And that was a conversation you said, well, did that happen shortly before the meeting you ultimately had with Sussman? So the texts are going on before the meeting. Says, yeah, that's correct. On or about January 2017, right? Yes. And so you said that that's a conversation that happened 5 years ago. And so you're paraphrasing because you don't remember exactly what was said, right? Another memory issue. And this has been a big part of the defense. Nobody remembers anything, including Mark Elias, who just was, one of the most sort of intelligent lawyers ever, according to the Democrats, because he was very victorious the last election, but now suddenly can't remember anything, even though there's 35 different calendar invites that they went through. Says that's correct. And in contrast to that conversation, says the defense, where you don't have notes, so you don't know what was said, you ultimately met with Sussman. You did take notes at that meeting. So he's comparing and contrasting notes and conversations. You took notes over here, but you didn't take notes over here. And that's so that you remember this one and you don't remember that one. Correct? That's correct. And so we're just looking over these notes that are records of your conversation, right? Yeah. And so we don't have to guess in the same way that you might have to guess in other conversations. I mean, that's what notes are for, right? Right. So Mr. Louie told you, said Sussman had information that was possibly about some significant national security that he wanted to share. And at that point, do you understand that Sussman wanted to share information with the CIA when he said that, when Louie reached out to you first? Chadason says, all I understood was that he wanted to meet with me and share it with me. And you testified a moment ago that in meeting with you, your understanding was Sussman was hoping to get a meeting with the CIA, right? Yeah. And that he wanted to be able to meet with them, and he was hoping that he could convince you somehow to make that arrangement, to help them set that up, right? Right. So the conversation you had with him, says the defense, was a conversation that had you thinking, all right, he's telling me this stuff because he wants me to pass this along to the CIA. Is that fair? Yeah, that's fair. And when you had that conversation, which remind me, it was a restaurant, hotel in Virginia, and you took notes? I believe so. Yeah. And what led you to take the notes of the conversation? He says, I generally have a book with me. I'm older. I'm 66. I don't tend to remember everything, so I take notes. And the defense says, well, you look great, Mr. Chadason. You look fantastic. You're 66? I wouldn't give you a day over 40. And he says, thank you. So you took notes. And I assume it's fair to say that one of the reasons you took notes is you understood that he had information that could have national security implications, and you wanted to keep a record of what it was so that you could accurately tell the CIA about it. I mean, is that right? And he says, well, I always take notes, but yes. So he would have taken notes anyways, essentially. It doesn't matter if it was a national security issue or not. They could have been talking about a new cookie recipe, and he's like, that sounds delicious. Let me try that. And so the question comes from the defense, and let's turn back for a moment to that memo that you ultimately wrote. You had the meeting with Mr. Sussman, you took notes, and that same day you turned those notes into a memo, right? Yes. And so let's take a look at the memo that you created. That day, based on the notes you took that day of the conversation that you had with Sussman. Contemporaneous, you took the notes right after the meeting, didn't you? Bosworth says, all right, ladies, okay, if we can turn up this government exhibit, just the first page, blow the story up. Thank you, please. So from the get-go here, asks Bosworth, Mr. Sussman's meeting with you, hoping that you're going to pass information along to the CIA. You start your memo, you say, Sussman said he represents a client, right? That's the first substantive sentence. Do you see that? Yeah, I see it. And as you indicated, that when Mr. Sussman told you he's got this client, he's got a client, though, doesn't want to be known. And did you ask him more about that or try to identify the client, or did you just take it as represented? He says, no, I did ask him. And do you recall what he said? He said he didn't want to be identified. And the word client in your memo is capitalized here. He's holding it up. It says, is there any particular reason why you capitalize the word client here, Mark? It's just a habit in writing my memos and my years of experience, which is something that, a lot of law enforcement people say. They say this all the time. In my years of experience. Why is that something that's true? I don't know. Just because of my years of experience. Yeah, but do you have any other? I don't know. My years of experience. Okay. All right. Here he says, and was that the habit? Because he's referring to a client, or because it's a third party person he's referencing? Why is the capital C? Al Gore says, objection, Your Honor. And the court's like, why? What's the objection for what? What's your basis? And Al Gore says, let's get on the phone, Judge. And so this happens on the phone. They pick up the phone, and then we get redacted conversations. Can you believe this right here? We can't see what the heck they talked about. I hate that. Don't you hate that? Well, thank you for your super chats that are helping to cover the cost of these pages. Even though we're not getting any juice out of it, we're in this together. All right, Mr. Bosworth says, they get off the phone now, so they rectify this issue, and we don't know what it is. But Bosworth comes back out and asks, I was just asking you about the capitalization of the client. See, client. Client's capitalized throughout the rest of your memo, right? Yeah. And there's another reference to client right there. Big, bold letters. That's our highlighting, not yours, right? Yeah. All right, let's go to the next page. On the next page, there's a whole paragraph you put in here about client. So let's just go through that for a minute. You said here at the start, Sussman would not provide client's identity. You said that a moment ago, right? Yeah. And you indicated, it says, was not sure if the client would reveal himself to CIA, but he would provide the data assets supporting his claims, which would then be verified. Was it you who were not sure if the client would reveal himself, or did Mr. Sussman say he was not sure if the client would reveal himself? Do you remember that? He says, I believe it was Sussman who said the client. He was not sure that the client would reveal himself. That was Sussman's words. Defense says, so he said he's not sure if the client would reveal himself, but he would provide, did he use the word he, or do you remember, did he use he to refer to the client as opposed to she? Do you remember? He says, pronouns? This could be very nefarious business. We got to be very careful here. He or she, or was it any one of the others? You know, that I don't know. It's not very inclusive question here from the defense. Bosworth. It's 2022, brother, or whatever you identify as. There's a lot more pronouns than just he or she, okay? Ridiculous. And so Mark says, I think the pronoun was he. But yes, that's what I wrote. So the defense says, so he said, but he, this client, unnamed, would provide data sets supporting his claims, which could then be verified. It says, Chadason, you were able to elicit that the client is an engineer. So let's just stop there for a second. Did you press Mr. Sussman for more information about this client? Recognizing that he's not going to tell you the name, that you're trying to gather information about him. Are you trying to grill him for this? He said, I was trying to find more bona fides information that he was providing. Yeah. And so it sounds like in response to pushing from you, he told you the client's an engineer, right? So you're kind of digging into him a little bit. Yeah, that's right. And he has a number of patents. Yeah. And it's most likely a contractor to the IC, meaning he's got some relationship to the intelligence community. Is that right? Is that what you understood? He says, yes. And Sussman said the client has various projects. He says the client, this engineer guy with patents, has worked with the intelligence community before, right? He said that, right? Yes. And he said the client's a Republican? Yes, correct. So in that one paragraph alone, asked the defense, we've got a whole lot of client references because this is a paragraph about the client. Understood. And let's go on to the next chunk about this. Wait a minute. It says Al Gore. It says, let's go to the next chunk on this page, please. Was that? All right, so let's keep going. So now Bosworth here. Bosworth asks a question. Here, you asked if Sussman had provided data. This data to the FBI. We'll hear more about that. And initially, Mr. Sussman, it seems, says he knew about Jim Traynor at the FBI. Do you know who Jim Traynor was? This is the guy who he said that Sussman met with previously. When he went to the FBI, he didn't meet with James Baker. He met with Jim Traynor, even though we know now from testimony that he did, in fact, meet with James Baker. That was James Baker's testimony. Did you know who Jim Traynor was when Sussman came and told you that? I did not. And he then claimed, Mr. Sussman, that his client did not want to provide this to the FBI, as he knows the FBI did not have the resources to deal with these issues. What did you understand that to mean, if you remember that, resources? To the best of my recollection is that to deal with these issues, he wants sophisticated technical resources, which the FBI did not have, according to Mr. Sussman, which might very well be true. Who knows? And then he says that Mr. Sussman told you he's openly a Democrat. Sussman's like, well, I'm a Democrat, by the way. Yeah, he did. And he told you he does. He openly told you that he does a lot of work with the DNC, the Democratic National Committee. Yeah. And did that matter to you that he told you that he worked for the DNC or that he's a Democrat? That bother you at all, sir? No. No party has a monopoly on patriotism, he says. Did the fact that he was, a Democrat cause you to question whether he might have some odd motivation here? No. Did it cause you to question what the real story was here? He says, well, the story was very shocking, is not the word, but it was a very big story. But I want to make sure that if I send a memo of this, if I put Mr. Sussman together with a senior CIA officer, that the story makes sense and the sourcing makes sense. Just got a doorbell ring. Don't know what that was. I'll check it here in a minute. Chadason says, you were also asked about on direct examination. Mr. Sussman said that he did speak with the CIA general counsel before retirement. And we get a longer question here. Is there anything more you remember about why he mentioned that? Why that was relevant? And Chadason says, I may have asked him if he spoke to the CIA before. I think this response was that he did speak to the general counsel before he left or retired. I'm not so sure. And defense asks, and then you were also asked about this last piece here. They're still going through this memo. Sussman said his client would likely only provide the data to senior bona fide CIA officers. And if there's no interest, then he's going to go to the New York Times, right? And that's what your memo says. I mean, that's what you wrote down. You wrote those words, didn't you? Yes, I did. And what did you understand him to be saying there? Chadason says, well, that he would like to meet with, I was retired, so not with me, obviously, but with a certain officer of the agency who is active duty. And if the agency had no interest, the next step would be the New York Times. And you didn't understand that to be any kind of a threat or anything from the CIA. He says, I understood it as a frustration way. Mr. Sussman seemed frustrated throughout the meeting. I can bet he did, didn't he? I'm sure he did. Yes. I'm sure he felt very frustrated because your impression was that Mr. Sussman had a sense of frustration that no one was listening to him. Isn't that right? He had a sense of frustration. I'm not sure why. Yeah, don't know why. And the defense is trying to frame this. He's frustrated because nobody's listening to him, right? Not because he's panicking, because the walls are closing in around him, because his little scheme failed epically, and Donald Trump's the incoming president, and he just tweeted not too long ago that he knew exactly what you and your little cronies did. That's not why. And Chadason's like, I'm not sure why. Could have been anything. Defense says, you remember meeting with a group of investigators that included FBI agents on August 5th, 2020 now, not too long ago. Yeah, I do remember that, says Mark. And when you were interviewed, you were trying to be accurate and truthful there. Yeah. Do you remember being asked whether you took this bit about going to the FBI, going to the press as a threat? And your answer was no. Your sense was that there was a sense of frustration that no one was listening. You remember saying that? So what he's doing on this, right? So I sort of had fun with this. I'm not sure why. See this one? I'm not sure why was his answer. And what the defense is going to do is impeach him with a prior statement and saying, well, in a prior statement, you sort of sounded like you were a little bit more sure why. In a prior statement, you said something like you thought maybe it was because no one was listening. You remember saying that? He says, possibly. I don't remember the exact words, but. And the defense says, you want me to refresh your recollection with this? He says, sure. I've never seen a memo of the interview, and he pulls it up. Does that refresh your recollection about whether you told them this, that no one was listening, and that's why he was frustrated? And then Chadason says, yeah, that's correct. And so he had told you that he tried to meet with the general counsel, and that didn't work out. Right. And now he's trying to meet with you because he wants this to go to the CIA. Chadason says, I assume so. Yeah. Well, you write that. You say that's the purpose of his meeting with you, don't you? Yeah. And you believe that he wanted someone to listen because he was alarmed as an American about the situation, right? He said, and Chadason asks, is that what I said? Well, I'm asking you, Mr. Chadason. He says, well, again, he was frustrated. He wanted to get the information out. The exact words, though, they escape me. Defense is getting agitated. Again, the same meeting that you had, August 25th. Let's just show the witness. Page 4, paragraph 3, just for the witness. Okay, does this reflect your recollection of what he said, that he conveyed to you that he was alarmed as an American about the situation, right? And Chadason says, yes, okay, fair enough, whatever's on the screen. And he was alarmed about the potential national security implications of the information, right? Correct. And by the time this is now January 2017, the election's over, isn't it? Yeah. Hillary Clinton's not running for president anymore, is she? No. Donald Trump is actually president now, isn't he? Yes. And you said before when you were talking that, he seemed concerned or alarmed as an American, and your view was that the information was credible enough to be passed along to the CIA, wasn't it? And Chadason says, my feeling was that the information was interesting enough to pass to the CIA to be indiscernible again. Can you repeat that answer, please? He says, it was my The information for me was interesting enough for it to be passed to the CIA, to be vetted and validated, and they'll find out whether it's credible or not. I'm not able to make that judgment just sitting there having breakfast with Mr. Sussman. So Bosworth says, okay, we're going to pull up this set of notes from a different set of notes from a different meeting. And he says, fine, pull them up. Okay. Now, this is a meeting that you had with various investigators and Mr. DeFilippis from the prosecution, right? Yeah. Does this refresh your recollection about whether you told them that you thought the information was credible enough to pass on to the CIA? And so the defense attorney just doesn't like a lot of these answers. And so he's just sort of making him eat them a little bit, saying, okay, let me just clarify your words a little bit. And a lot of this is to get some of these words out. Yesterday, we talked a lot about sort of one of the tactics of the defense is to try to create these kind of credibility chains to show that everybody who's involved in this is very highly credible. I think I made a note of that. I'm not sure where I made a note of it, but the idea being that every single time one of these witnesses come out, everybody says that they're all highly credible. So almost by osmosis, Michael Sussman, who even if you think he might be a liar or whatever, he's at least somebody who's operating like in this really legitimate national security framework. And that makes him more legitimate because of all the legitimacy around him. It's sort of like layering on a bunch of good facts on top of a bad fact. So they're asking about this. You thought it was credible enough to pass over to the CIA, right? What I told them was because Sussman was a former DOJ official, a very credible person based on his resume. Just based on the resume, I thought it was credible enough to pass on. I didn't want to make a judgment about whether the information itself was credible because I have no ability to assess the credibility of that information. But based on what was told to me and the source, Mr. Sussman, who is 12 years in the DOJ, a powerful DC lawyer who has reason as far as I know to say otherwise, seems like a credible source to pass it on. Bosworth says, so just to be clear, I think you said, I know you said more than this, but you said it was credible enough to pass on for a variety of reasons. Is that correct? The source was credible enough to pass it on. When you take notes, and that's the answer that Bosworth wanted out of this, right? The source was credible enough. Continue, says, when you take notes, you're accurate, aren't you? You're pretty accurate with these things, right? I take notes. Do you have any reason to doubt the accuracy of your notes? And so he's kind of getting, this CIA agent's getting a little bit, agitated. When you take notes, you're accurate, right? He could have said, yeah. He said, I take notes. Oh. Do you have any, and so the defense says, do you have any reason to doubt the accuracy of your notes? So asks it a different way. And so he says, oh, well, I don't take my notes verbatim. I write general sentences that jog my memory. Yeah. And I know it may be a different agency is the defense question, but do you have any reason to doubt the accuracy of FBI agents' notes? No. And if you had said, I thought the source was credible enough to pass along the information, would you figure the notes would reflect that? I assume so. And so we had said, I think that you wrote these notes. If you look at the first page of the memo, going back to the minute of 12:57 p.m. of your interview with Sussman that day, put that up on the screen and blow it up. You see right here, Mr. Chadason, it says Tuesday, January 31st. See that? Yeah. And so you've quickly turned your notes into a memo you've quickly turned your notes into a memo that day and you passed it along. So this is all still fresh in your mind when you're taking these notes. You're writing the notes and creating the memo all in the same moment, same day, contemporaneous, right? Yes. And then you pass this along. So you knew, so Sussman met with you, you took notes of your conversation. He told you all about the client that was behind this, understanding that you were going to pass this along to the CIA, and then you did pass the memo to the CIA, correct? Correct. And when you did, you flagged for them that they should remember this guy is a partisan lawyer who closely works with the DNC. Do you remember saying that, Mr. Chadason? No, I don't. Okay, Bosworth says, let's pull up this email. Here, this email chain between you and CIA employees back on January 31st. You don't remember this? I'm going to show you. Any objection? No, from the prosecution, so it's moved into evidence. Defense says, here's that email. I want to call your attention to page 2. There's redactions here, but I think the government would agree that you reference employee 16. That's a reference to you. And so you sent an email to someone at the CIA at the top of the page. You see that here? Yeah. And can you read the third and fourth sentences of this? He says, starting with please. Yeah. Please remember, this guy is a partisan lawyer who works closely with the DNC. So I'm not sure what the real story here is, but I'm sure you guys will figure it out. Yeah. That's the email to the CIA. And so the defense asks, so Sussman didn't hide that he was a Democrat, did he? No. And he told you he did work for the DNC. He did. And that raised some concern in your mind. That's why you said, not sure what the real story here is, right? Right. And you said to the CIA, but you guys will figure it out, right? And you passed your memo along that said client, 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 explaining that the client was. And you sent that to the CIA, didn't you? Yes. Bosworth says no further questions. And he's done with his cross-examination. Now, Al Gore says, very briefly, Your Honor, we get a redirect exam from the government prosecutors. Mr. Al Gore says, all right, Mr. Chadason, during cross-examination up here, Bosworth asked you a few questions about credibility. And so your assessment of Mr. Sussman's credibility was based on what? His biography? Is that right? That's correct. Yeah. That's correct. Yeah. And you only met with him for approximately an hour and a half. Is that true? That's about right. Okay. Now turning over to, you also were asked about credibility of the information that he provided to you. Do you remember questions about that? Yes. And do you know if the information that Sussman provided to the CIA was found credible? Objection! Bosworth is... And there is a proceeding that happens outside the presence of the jury. So they pick up the phones and the court is like, why did you object again? I don't remember. I was sort of dozing off there. What are we talking about? He says, remind me what the ruling was on this. Bosworth, who made the objection, says, Your Honor, I believe the ruling was that we could introduce evidence of the conclusions of the CIA to the extent that it affected the FBI's conclusions and its investigations, which we previously told you at least that ended in January 2017 before this meeting took place. So I wasn't getting into just to anticipate something Al Gore may say. I didn't elicit testimony about whether it was or wasn't, just that he met with Sussman and felt like he could pass it along. Obviously, he didn't look at the evidence himself. Court says, okay, that's an interesting opinion. Mr. Prosecutor, what do you say? Prosecutor says, look, Your Honor, I do believe that he was asking questions about the credibility of the information and why he would then be passing it along. So I kind of think I think the whole point of asking this question was to elicit a no, because I based on his questions in prior testimony. And so the court says, I'm going to deny this line. I think we're pretty clear in saying the CIA's conclusions were out of bounds unless there was some evidence that influenced the investigation. And so the prosecutor says, understood. And that's right. The court basically did say that. They weren't going to come into the conclusions about any of the white papers or anything, which is unfortunate because they're all, of course, fake. So he excludes that, can't get into the conclusions that the CIA had. So the prosecutor goes back now and says, Chadason, very briefly here, you were asked about Exhibit 806, saying that Sussman is a partisan Democrat. That's right. And why did you pass along that information to the CIA that he's a Democrat? He says, I think I was characterizing his background. And why do you consider that to be relevant to pass along? Democrat. He says possibility of bias, but it was very informal communication. It wasn't a memorandum or anything like that, just an email. Prosecutor says, and when you say bias, is someone's motivations important in understanding for when the CIA is assessing something? Do you need to know why they might have a motivation? Chadason, ex-CIA, says, my experience over 20 years in the CIA is that sourcing is very important. And information coming from a source is usually judged based on the source's credibility and the background. And the prosecutor says, perfect. Right answer. Nothing further, Your Honor. Court says, all right, Mr. Chadason, thank you for your testimony. You are excused. And thank you, everybody. We are now having a break now. Please don't discuss your testimony. Have a great weekend. Thank you. Steps down. And we're going to get to a different witness coming in hot. But 1 second, I have to check on something. Because the doorbell rang. And I don't know what's out there. Maybe it's the CIA. I don't know. But I'm going to take care of that here in a minute. All right. All right. So we'll see if the CIA is out there. Hopefully not. All right. So we now have our next witness. Let's take a water break, shall we? Cheers on the water break. And let's see what we've got now. Okay, so we're back in business. The court says, hello, everybody. Good to see you, Mr. Keelty. And remember, we talked about this. Mr. Keelty had to leave. He was not in the trial for the earlier part of the week because he had a family incident. And so he's back. So hopefully that all got resolved. And the court acknowledges that. It says, good to see you, Mr. Keelty. Good to see you. Thank you, Your Honor. And that's sort of, they're like bro fisting without saying it. They're like, thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor. And he's going to be doing this direct exam. And so he's like back on the horse, which is great. That's good news. Your Honor, the government calls Mr. P, Kevin P. Kevin P is that CIA agent who got outed. Kevin Pierce, something, excuse me. Court says, all right, step right up, sir. Raise your right hand. We're going to get you sworn in. Have a seat. And he does. Can you please spell your name, sir? He says, Kevin, last initial P. And Kevin, are you employed? Well, right now I'm retired, but how about this? Prior to your retirement, where did you last work? He says, the CIA. How long were you over there? The CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency? Yeah, the CIA, 32 and a half years. Wow. What was the last position that you held there at the CIA? He says that it was a counterintelligence mission center. All right, so you were there. Let's turn back the clock. February 2017, what position did you hold at the CIA? Same position. And I'm just going to refer to the CIA as agency. Is that okay? You okay with that? Yeah, no problem. Kevin, are you familiar with a guy by the name of Michael Sussman? I am. And how are you familiar with Sussman? I met him back in February 2017. You recall where that meeting took place or when that meeting took place? He says, yeah, it took place there at CIA headquarters back on February 9th, 2017. Prior to the meeting with Michael, we got to change our person here. This is the CIA agent now, who is now on the screen. And prior to your meeting with Mr. Sussman, what, if anything, was your understanding of the purpose of the meeting? He was offering information relative to national security threats. And what, if anything, was your understanding, Kevin, of how Mr. Sussman arranged this meeting? He had someone he knew, a contact that he went through from before. This contact was he associated with any certain entity? He says, it was my understanding that the contact was an agency contact that he had. All right. And prior to the meeting, did you have any understanding of what Sussman did for a living? Do you know who this guy is? Yeah, he's a lawyer. Did you have an opportunity to speak with him before the meeting took place? Yeah. And what'd you talk about? Says, I got on the phone with him to set up the meeting, time, location, and place. Okay. So that was just a scheduling meeting then. Yeah, just scheduling. And prior to the meeting, was it your understanding? Did you know anything about whether Sussman was representing a client in connection with the meeting? CIA agent Kevin says, I didn't have any knowledge of whether he was or wasn't before the meeting. Okay, Kevin, I got to ask you this question. Did you meet with the government prior to your testimony today? Yeah. Did you meet a couple times with the government, more than once? Yeah. And during those meetings, did you see a chain of emails relating to Sussman and the CIA? Yes, I did. And were those emails dated prior to Sussman's meeting? Yes, one of them was. Did one of those emails that you looked at reference the fact that Sussman had a client? Yes. And as you sit here today, you recall remembering that email? Seeing that email in February of 2017? Did you see it back then? Do you recall that? No, I don't recall seeing that email and memo. I saw it when you showed it to me, but I don't recall reading it in advance of that meeting. Oh, okay. Was it possible that you read it? It says, yeah, it's possible I read it. I just don't remember reading it. Okay. So turning to February 2017, back in February 9th, did a meeting with Sussman happen? Yeah. And again, you testified this meeting was at the CIA, right? Yeah. And who attended this meeting? It was me, Steve M, and Mr. Sussman. Who is Steve M? He's an agency lawyer over at the CIA, an employee. Yeah, an employee and a lawyer. And prior to the meeting with Sussman on February 9th, did you receive what, if any, guidance did you receive from your superiors at the CIA as a reference to this conduct of this meeting with Sussman? What did you talk to them about? That we were simply to conduct this meeting so that we could accept or listen to what information he had. This was an offer and a document for the appropriate forwarding. So we're just supposed to sort of sit there, take whatever he brings us, and receive it. And you previously testified that you had an understanding that Mr. Sussman was an attorney. Is that correct? Yeah. And during that meeting, did Sussman say he was representing a client in connection with the meeting? He said he wasn't representing a client. Oh, he said he wasn't representing a client, but he told Chadason that he was representing a client, so that Chadason knew it. But then when he got to the actual meeting, Story changed again. And did you become aware during that meeting whether Sussman was part of a law firm? Yeah. And during that meeting with Sussman, did he provide any information about particular clients? He said other lawyers at the firm represented the DNC and Hillary. What was your understanding of whether Sussman was representing those particular clients? He made it clear that he did not have any connection with them. This guy, unbelievable. And based on what you learned, what was your understanding based on what you learned in the meeting about how Sussman came to possess the information that he gave to you? How did he get the info? He said he had contacts that provided him the information. Okay, Kevin. And what information did Sussman actually give you back then on February 9th, 2017? He said there was a server, a Russian bank server, that he was communicating with a Trump candidate server, and he also provided some of the other secondary information on another technical security threat. And the prosecutor, the prosecutor says, so you just testified that Mr. Sussman came to possess this information through certain contacts, right? Yeah. Did Sussman provide the names of those contacts? No. At the time, he said they remained anonymous because of the potential threat to them from the Russians. It's always the Russians. They're going to just get everybody everywhere all the time, no matter what you do. Just give up already. Prosecutor says, okay, and based on what you learned in the meeting, what, if any, concerns did you have about the CIA investigating these allegations? CIA agent Kevin says, well, at the time, there wasn't any investigation. We were asked to meet with Sussman because he was offering information. We were going to accurately collect it and give it to the proper hands. Okay, given some concerns, did you have an understanding of whether this information might possibly be forwarded to the FBI? Yeah, going in, I assumed based on the nature of the information that we would be going to the FBI, like we're going to take it to them. But that became clear during the meeting that it would have to go in that direction. And based on what you learned in the meeting with Sussman, what, if anything, was your understanding about whether these allegations had been previously brought to the FBI? Did he take them before? He says, yes, during the meeting, we came to understand that he did talk to the FBI about related matters or matters related to this, but that was it. So he changed the story a little bit because when he talked to Chadason, he said that he didn't meet with the FBI, or he did, but it was somebody else. Remember, it was not James Baker. So in other words, actually, it is consistent. He said he did meet with the FBI both times, but he just wasn't truthful about who he met with. Kevin, CIA, how long did the meeting with Sussman last? He says 60 to 120 minutes. And during the meeting, did he provide you with any materials, anything? He says, yeah, documents, papers, some thumb drives as well. And when you finish this meeting, what'd you do with those documents and thumb drives? Well, Steve and I gave them to our technical folks and they took a look at it. Thank you, Kevin. When you had this meeting, did you take notes? Yes. Do you normally take notes? Yes. Do you normally take accurate notes? Yes. And following the meeting, what did you do to memorialize that meeting? He says, I would have asked Steve to prepare a memo documenting the conversation. Okay, and what's the purpose of writing a memo? Well, to memorialize it and to forward it to the appropriate entities. In this case, it was going to go to the FBI. In fact, in the meeting, I said to Mr. Sussman that it's likely going to be forwarded to the FBI. You testified that Steve M., after you consulted with this, he was the primary drafter of the memo. Is that right? Steve wrote this? Yeah. Sometimes is a memo referred to as a memorandum for record? Yeah. Called an MFR? Yeah. Kevin, I'm going to show you what's been marked as an exhibit. It's going to be an MFR. It's a memorandum for record from Stephen M. to me. It's an email, right? What's the date of this? Yeah, looks like I got this February 9th, 2017. There's attachment on this one. Yeah. And turning to the second page of this exhibit, what does this look like? It says this is a draft memo that Steve wrote. Did you review this? Yeah, I did. And did you ultimately make edits to this? Yes, I did. Okay, perfect. Well, we're going to move to admit this as an exhibit. And let's take a look at the first page of this puppy. He says, this is the memo from Steve M. to me, the draft, and the body just reads, here you go. Feel free to add, subtract, or edit as needed. And that's on February 9th, the same date as the meeting with Sussman? Yes. And the second page of this document. I believe you just testified this was Steve's draft, right? All right, blow this one up. All right, let's go on here. Can you read the first paragraph here, Kevin? All right, it says on February 9th, Kevin P. and Steve M. met with Michael Sussman, a lawyer for the firm Perkins Coie, to discuss information which Sussman had previously indicated to be of interest to the CIA. At the meeting, says the memo, Sussman provided both written documents and thumb drives which he claimed contained data related to potential Russian activities connected to presidential candidate-elect Trump. Prosecutor stops him and says, all right, before we go further, I'm just going to ask you to slow down a little bit for the benefit of the court reporter. We love our court reporters here, folks. Could not be doing this without them. He says, all right, sorry about that. But at least he's speaking into the microphone, unlike the other CIA agent. He says, no, it's quite all right. All right, blow this up, please. Can you read the second paragraph here, Kevin? Says, sure. As background, Sussman had previously reached out to CIA's general counsel, Carolyn Krass, in December of 2017. As he recalled, she had advised that she would be in touch sometime after coordination, but he never heard back from anything from the CIA OGC. He said that he tried to recontact the general counsel. I'm sorry, it says GC, yeah, but that no one ever returned his call, which led him to reach out to blank, who referred the matter to us. Just a couple acronyms there. What does this mean? General Counsel, and CIMC is Counterintelligence Mission Center. So it all got passed along through the chain of command. All right, let's move on. We got a third paragraph here. Kevin, read this one now. Sussman advised that he was not representing a particular client, and the information he was volunteering to us was not privileged. His contacts switched to provide information to us through Sussman, to the U.S. government through Sussman, but the clients preferred to remain anonymous. Sussman said that he believed his contacts were acting in good faith out of a sense of loyalty to the United States government. Oh, gosh. Get a room. Sussman himself said that he did not expect anything from the U.S. government and that he did not seek any sort of feedback or further contacts, though he would be open to future contact if the CIA had a need. The memo continues, says he was upfront in disclosing that his firm was active in supporting Democratic causes and office holders, including both the DNC and then presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, but that such work was unrelated to his reasons for contacting the CIA. He merely wanted to pass along information that he thought would be of interest to the government and then let the CIA and the FBI validate it and do whatever they need to do. Okay, go on to the next paragraph here. Mr. Keelty says, please read this one. Memo goes on. Sussman noted that one of his contacts was a U.S. person and clearance holder, but the information that his contact had collected, so in other words, the content of the thumb drives, was, quote, private collection, suggesting the data had been collected by his contact as a matter of personal interest, so not from some sort of intelligence agency. He also advised that his contacts believed their actions had put them at some personal risk, though some of this could be simply paranoia, obviously. Prosecutor says, thanks. Next paragraph, paragraph 5, says Sussman gave a general description of the data that he was providing to us, saying it was connected to, quote, the domain name system, close quote, DNS information, okay? And the last paragraph, Kevin P's reading from the memo, says Kevin P advised Sussman that the location of such visits within the U.S. would refer any relevant information to the FBI. It's a domestic issue. Got to go over there. Steve M also advised we had a crimes reporting obligation. And then he says, that's it. Just stop. Last paragraph is, we would need to report any evidence of criminal activity over to the FBI and the DOJ. Sussman had no objections to providing the info to the FBI. He mentioned that he had previously contacted General Counsel Jim Baker on a similar, though unrelated matter. There it is. They say, we got to talk to the FBI about this. He's like, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you I talked to the FBI. Based on his perception that the FBI had not handled the matter well, and because he thought the FBI might lack the technical expertise, he wanted to take it to the CIA. Prosecutor says, thank you. All right, go back to the first paragraph. What was the purpose of forwarding this memo now? He says, so that I could edit it or subtract or do anything that I needed to do to change it. And there came a time when you reviewed this memo? Yeah. And did you eventually make edits? Yes. Okay, I'm showing you this one, another exhibit. What is this one? It says, this is my response to Steve. So we got the memo and I responded. It says, the date is the same, February 9th. Is that right? Yeah. Okay, read the email. So he sends this back to Steve. He says, Steve, I reviewed and revised the attached MFR. If you concur with the verbiage, I will forward the MFR to blank for them to craft and use the MFR. The blank assessment of the thumb drive's content, the copy of the thumb drives, and the text provided by Sussman. Thanks. Okay, Kevin, what's the date of this email? What date on this one? February 23rd. So that's 2 weeks after Kevin sent the email up the chain. Yeah. There's another email. What is this? That's kind of small. They blow it up. That one has my changes. That was attached to the email. Okay. So they're talking about his response and he made some changes and they're talking about the actual revised MFR. Can you tell the jury what changes you made to this thing? He says, Well, I changed that Mr. Sussman was not representing a particular client and that the information he was volunteering was not privileged. I added those two things. And could you read this sentence? The second sentence says his contacts wished to provide the information through Sussman, but they wanted to remain anonymous. You see the word client there? Is that correct? Yeah. Okay, and read the second sentence. His clients wish to provide the information, preferring anonymity, citing a potential threat from Russian sources. Prosecutor asks, what's the difference there, Kevin, between what we just read in 812 and 817? Does the word client appear in 817? Yes. CIA agent says, in the first one, it says the clients preferred to remain anonymous. In the second, it said his contacts wish to provide information and remain anonymous. Oh, so that's curious. Why did the word clients change to contacts? Why did that happen from one sentence to another sentence? Did you make that change, Kevin, CIA? I did. Why did you do that? Well, he says because he did not refer to them as clients during the meeting. He called them contacts. And did he make any other edits to Steve's initial memo? At the end of the memo, there were some value judgments about how the FBI handled the interaction. It's not our place to put value judgments on how they handle things. And we just wanted to point out to them the fact that they had seen this matter before so they could find whatever it was and put together whatever he was providing them. Is it fair to say you took out those value judgments? You didn't say that the FBI are losers like your Steve partner did? Yeah, I took those out. Kevin, when you were revising this, did you rely on anything to refresh your recollection? I did. Yeah, I looked at my notes. And in the third paragraph that's up, it says something like, Mr. Sussman advised that he was not representing a particular client and the information that he was volunteering to us was not privileged. Did I read that right? He says, yeah, you got it. And that's the same sentence that appeared in Stephen M's initial MFR. So in other words, you heard that and Steve heard that, didn't you? Is that correct? And you agree with Steve's drafting of that sentence? Yes, I do. Why? Because that's what was stated in the meeting. That's why I didn't change it, because it was true. Oh, okay. And Kevin, is it important that your memo be factually accurate? He says, yeah. Why? Because we're conveying what could potentially be a relative to national security information and a threat to the United States. And you testified that you had an understanding this information could go to the FBI, right? Yeah. And what was that based on? Well, based on the fact that it involved U.S. people and it happened in U.S. territories. And is it important the CIA pass on accurate information to the FBI? Like this has to be truthful? Yes, it is. So everything in there is true? Yes, it is. Mic drop from Mr. Keelty. That's the prosecutor who has come back and joined the prosecution. And so from there, we get sort of a very detailed breakdown of exactly what happened at a second meeting, some of which mirrors the FBI meeting. And we get to see a little bit of a pattern here out of Michael Sussman and how he comports himself. Now, the defense comes up to the podium, and this one is being done by Sean Berkowitz. He's over at Latham and Watkins there out of New York, New York. And here he is. He says, all right, it's my turn, buddy boy. CIA, watch this. He says, good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon. My name is Sean Berkowitz, and I represent Sussman over there. You recognize him? Yeah. You saw him back in February 17? Yeah. And when you were interviewed first by the government, that was when? June 2021? Does that sound about right? So that's a long time ago. He says, yeah, that sounds about right. I don't remember exactly. And the defense says, so a little over 4 years after that meeting that you had with Sussman, right? Yeah. And at that time, you didn't even remember his name, did you? No, I did not. You didn't even remember the meeting? I remembered the meeting. Yeah. Did you remember the meeting before the government showed you the materials about the meeting or not? He says, yeah, I remembered. Did you remember the substance of the meeting here? Yes. You didn't recall Sussman's name, though, correct? Correct. And you didn't recall whether he worked for a law firm, correct? I only recall that he was a lawyer, but I didn't remember what law firm or if at the time he was. I didn't remember at the time whether he was working for a law firm. Berkowitz says, and you didn't remember the substance of any partisan affiliation, correct? No. Your memory of something that occurred 4 years before you were talking about it is somewhat hazy, right? Says it was dated, and the government showed you the memo that had been prepared in order to help you remember, didn't they? That's correct. And it's one of the reasons when you have a meeting implicating national security issues, you take notes, right? That's correct. So if at some point in the future it's necessary, you have a written record of what happened. Isn't that true? That's correct. And in this case, we've seen a copy of, we're going to go through it a little bit of detail here, but it's fair to say that what's contained in this memo is your best recollection of what happened back on February 9th in 2017 when you met with Sussman. Yes. Before we get into the meeting itself, you received certain information about Sussman, didn't you? I was on emails, he says, about previous meetings, yeah. And as a general matter, you're tasked with attending a meeting with a source relative to national security. When you get on these meetings, do you try to familiarize yourself with what the meeting is going to be about? He says, oh, absolutely, I do. And if there were meetings and emails that were sent summarizing the meeting or what the meeting was going to be about, you would have expected in the ordinary course of your practice to have read those emails, right? Yeah. Now, all of us gets emails, and it may be difficult to recall having received a particular email 4 or 5 years ago, says Berkowitz, right? It's a long time, right? Yeah. That's a long time ago, correct? Yes. So let me just show you some to see if it refreshes your recollection, because you were generally asked about it. And I'm going to show you, sir, for identification purposes here. We've got Exhibit 16600, no objections, moved into evidence. And the defense says, and while I'm at it, while you're looking at it, sir, I'm going to ask the court reporter on the record to move into the exhibit, into evidence, these other exhibits as well. No objections, and that's done. Now back to real time, Mr. P. Mr. CIA Kevin, if you take a look at this document, does it appear that on January 31st in 2017 at about 12:59, blow that up on the screen, Mr. Cleaves, at least according to the records of the agency, you received an email forwarding of a memo conversation, quote, quick and dirty? He says, yeah, that's correct. Let's take a look at the memo of that conversation. Go down to the bottom. It's dated January 31st. It says, on January 31st, Mark Chadason, who we just heard from previously, introduced former CEO of Intel, Gilman Louie, to Michael Sussman. It says Sussman is a partner at Perkins Coie, and he does security and data practice. That's what it says? He says, that's what it says. And let's look at the second page. It says, let's just focus on the story. It says that Sussman said he represents a client who does not need to be known. You see that? Yeah. And we go down there. It says the client. You see that? Yeah. It says Sussman would not provide the client's identity. You see it? I do. And on the next page, there's a couple more references, I think over 10 in all. Third paragraph, client. Fourth paragraph, client. You see that? I do. So although you don't recall having received the document, you have no reason to believe this document, that you wouldn't have received it. It says, I didn't say I didn't recall receiving it. I said I didn't recall reading it. Get it right, defense loser. He says, okay, well, so do you have any reason to believe in preparation for a meeting with the individual who is going to be providing potential national security issues that you would not have read it? I do not recall reading it. He's trying to get him to say he read this email because he's trying to impeach him with it and say your story changed a little bit. He says, but I certainly may have read it. Defense is getting frustrated a little bit. Says, would you say that in your practice and experience, in your over 30 years as a CIA agent and your practice, and that your practice would have been to read such an email before meeting with a source like this, right? You would have done this, right? And he finally gets a yes out of him. Yeah, I read it. He got perfect. Thank you. His defense attorney's like, gosh, I'm going to get you. I'm going to get you. So just say yes. Got it. All right. Now let's take a look at this defense exhibit now. And if we take a look at the top of the email, sir, are you aware as to whether for purposes of this case, you're known as employee number 4? I don't know. Berkowitz says, can we get a stipulation saying that he is employee 4? Prosecutor says, yeah. Keelty says, yeah, no problem. So they're all agreeing that he is number 4, employee 4. Okay, so he says, all right, so obviously for confidentiality purposes, sir, we redacted your name, but the government has agreed we're going to call you employee 4. You are now employee 4. Congratulations. So assuming that agreement between the parties is correct, you would have received an email here at January 31st at 5 p.m., right? He says, so I'm employee 4. Is that what you're telling me? Yes. He says, so I wasn't receiving this. It says it's from me. Like I sent it. He says, oh, okay. I'm sorry. You're right. You're forwarding it. Correct. You received it at 4:40 in the next chain below. Pull that up on the screen. Okay. Assuming you're employee 4, as you have agreed, you received that email then back at 4:40. They back up the email chain. Yeah. And let's look at the second page and the top email within the body. I'm going to represent to you that this is Mark Chadason. Employee 16 is Mark Chadason, who we just talked about. He testified previously. And the CIA Kevin says, okay. Says he's sending it to employee 14 in the chain that's ultimately forwarded to you. So it goes 14 in the chain, then it goes over to Kevin. It says, just sent you the memo. Still waiting for his personal cell, which I should have in an hour or so. Thanks and good luck. I hope it's nothing serious. Please remember, this guy is a partisan lawyer who works closely with the DNC. And I'm not sure what the real story is, but I'm sure you guys will figure it out. And Kevin's just sitting there. He's like, okay, thanks for reading it. And defense says, per your ordinary practice, you likely would have read an email that was forwarded, correct? And now Kevin's like, yeah, right, got it. And then finally on the next page, it says that I need to speak with employee 18 today, if possible, about some teaser info I received in regard to a prominent attorney representing a client could be potentially a major issue. It may be old news to all, but I just want to close the loop before this. Do you see that here, Kevin? I do. And so you don't have an independent recollection of sitting here today, of having read those, but your normal practice would have been that you would have read those in preparation for the meeting, right? You would have read them? Yeah. And this email, 16 to 14, was part of the chain. Defense says that's why you were an agent for so long. Careful question. And the answer is yes. It's all part of the same document. This is below the chain that was forwarded to you. And he's given him a little bit of a kudos there. Ah, you're smart. And this email, it was part of that chain. So he's sort of putting the pieces together. And he's like, yeah, you are a smart CIA officer, huh? Pretty good there, Kevin. He says, okay, so let's turn over to another exhibit. Can you take a look at this document? Looks like this one was dated on February 9th. Looks like a copy of a memo. Blow that up on the screen. Let's look at this paragraph here that Kilty asked you to read. It says, Sussman advised that he was not representing a client and that his information was not privileged. You see that? Yeah. Did you ask him why, if he was not representing a client, that information he received was being provided, or why he got the information? He says, well, this is CIA agent Kevin says, well, he came in and said that he was not representing a client and that the information was not privileged. So he's setting the scene himself as to what happened. So he provided a lot of the information at this point with sort of caveats around it. You know, he set the scene. Did you ask Sussman questions? Yeah, I'm sure I did. Do you remember asking him? Do you remember any specific questions you asked? Like, you know, how's that? He says, no, I don't. What I did is I memorialized the meeting with what was the outcome and the direction of the information. And that's why we do that. It's so that it's the official record. As you pointed out, I retired and I did not see any of this for 4 years later. So it's important that this be correct and in place because people leave. And we go back to this memory theme again. Don't we? Defense says, and memories can be funny things, right? Wait till you see that in closing. It's going to be a lot of that. He says, his contacts wish to provide information to the U.S. government. Is that what USG stands for? Yeah. It also says that Sussman was saying that his people preferred anonymity, citing a threat from Russian intelligence. Do you see that? Yeah, I see it. And in your capacity as a CIA agent, without getting into anything classified, do you know that there are, in fact, potential threats from Russian intelligence services? He said that's not an unreasonable concern, correct? Correct. The Russians are dangerous. Putin really will come get you. Particularly when dealing with national security issues, right? Yes. And did you ask Sussman if his contact was also a client of his? He said, I don't recall asking that question, no. And Mr. Sussman was a lawyer at the time, wasn't he? Yeah. And he was providing information on behalf of an individual, wasn't he? Yeah, a contact. And the information appeared to be, at least according to what you had received on the incoming, that he was telling you was something that had potential national security issues, correct? Yeah. And he did he describe his contact as an individual who had patents and was an engineer? He says, I don't recall a specific conversation in the room about that. He could have, though, yeah. And the information that Mr. Chadason had forwarded to you was just looked at, talked about a client, about information that he wanted to pass through Mr. Sussman, right? Yeah. Okay, so I want to show you this next document. Let's take a look at this next paragraph. You had told him, am I right, sir, Kevin? You had told him, look, thanks for the information. It appears to be a domestic issue. We're CIA. This should go through the FBI. More or less? Kevin says, yeah, more or less, yeah. And there might have been more around it, but you're just saying, look, I mean, this is not our jurisdiction. We need to pass it along to a domestic counterintelligence group, right? Right. At or around the same time you were talking about that, Mr. Sussman said he had no objection to providing any of that to the FBI, right? Yeah, and he volunteered, didn't he? That he had previously actually talked to FBI General Counsel Jim Baker on similar unrelated matters, right? That's right. And you don't know, sir, how the FBI handled that matter, correct? No, I do not. And you ultimately did the best of your knowledge. You did pass the information back to the FBI, yeah. And you did ask, did you not, sir, whether Mr. Sussman was willing to ask his contact if they would be willing to speak to the FBI, didn't you? Yeah. Defense says, oh, great. And let's take a look at what he said in the last paragraph. I think the redaction is you, although you don't need to take my word for it. But in the meeting, someone from the CIA asked if Mr. Sussman's contact would be willing to speak directly with the FBI. Mr. Sussman said, quote, that could be on the table and he wouldn't rule it out. Do you see that? Yeah, I do. And when there are quotes around it, is that even more authoritative in the sense of what you were actually quoting, the specific words about Mr. Sussman? He says, yeah. And so, at least in the memo of an important meeting at the CIA, he said, Sussman said that the FBI, if the FBI wanted to talk to him, it could be on the table and he wouldn't rule it out. Is that right? Yes, it is. And you don't know whether the FBI ever asked to speak with his contact, do you? No. And Mr. Sussman added that his contacts would likely be willing at a future date to show U.S. government authorities how they could directly access information similar to the stuff provided on the thumb drives. True? Yes. Defense asks, let me ask you, if this were an inquiry without getting into anything relative to this data, it would have been reasonable to talk to the contact, correct? If the contact were willing to speak with somebody. For who? For the FBI to talk to the contact? Correct. Kevin says, yeah, you could assume that, but I didn't have any knowledge on that. Once we passed it, I had no knowledge of what transpired following that. Defense says, great. Let's go back to the third page. I think what you said was that it was important that this memo be accurate, and this memo most accurately reflects what you believe occurred that day. Didn't you say that? Yeah. Okay, let's take a look at the third paragraph. The last 3 lines, it says it starts with, he merely. Blow that up on the screen. The defense says, the quote, he in that sense is referring to Sussman, isn't it? Yeah. And it reads, he, Mr. Sussman, merely wanted to pass along the information that he thought would be of interest to the U.S. government and then let the CIA and the FBI validate the information and take whatever steps they want after the fact. Is that true? Correct. In the middle of the paragraph, he said, Mr. Sussman himself said that he did not expect anything from the U.S. government, nor did he require feedback or further contact, although we would be open to contact if the CIA had such a need. Is that right too? Yes. And you believe that accurately reflects what he said to you on February 9th? I do. Berkowitz says, thank you for your time. We get a very brief redirect from the prosecutor, Mr. Kielty's back in the house. Kevin, you were asked a lot of questions by Berkowitz over there and shown a bunch of emails by Berkowitz that reference a client. Is that true? Yes. And you testified on direct exam that you don't recall reading those emails. Is that true? I did not at the time you showed them to me recall reading them. You testified on cross that there was a chance that you did read those emails, right? Absolutely. Fair? Yes, absolutely fair. Assuming that you did read those emails, during your meeting with Sussman, would you have expected him to identify the client? Kevin says, I don't go in with any assumptions of what they will or will not do with regard to the person they're talking about. It says in this case, he said that they could be under threat and had to stay anonymous from those Russians. So we wouldn't have pressed the matter and tried to get them to name him. And based on having seen the emails that were shown to you by Berkowitz referencing a client, would you have assumed that Sussman would have told you in that meeting that he was in fact representing a client without getting into names? Like he would have said, I am here on behalf of a client. You would have assumed that, right? Yes. And did he say that to you? No. He said he was not representing a client. And Mr. Berkowitz showed you a number of emails that referenced that Mr. Sussman had connections to the DNC and other Democratic entities. Is that true? His law firm did. He said that he did not have connections, that he was not involved in those matters, but his law firm was. He said he was not involved in those matters. Ooh. Okay, and you testified on direct that Sussman informed you about those connections. True? Yeah. You also testified that those connections had nothing to do with the meeting that he was there on in February, right? Yeah. Kevin, you've been a CIA officer for 32 years. Is that correct? He says 32 and a half. Get it right, buddy boy. And you've been in a lot of meetings. Is that fair to say? Absolutely. He's like, for the love of, yeah, it's a lot. And you conducted a lot of interviews too. Is that a fair statement? Yeah. Do people sometimes make inconsistent statements in meetings that differ from what they've said in previous meetings? Yeah. Now, in the meeting that with Mr. Sussman, he also stated, according to your memo, that that he previously brought allegations of, I think, that are similar but are unrelated. Keelty says, actually, hold up. Can you pull that up? It's 817. Pull that up there. And the court interrupts him, says, Mr. Keelty, we have a sidebar, please. Get on the phone over there. I'm like, oh, great. Am I in trouble now? Uh-oh. Mr. Keelty picks up the phone. He's like, yes, Your Honor. What happened? Berkowitz says, the defense says, so I don't know where this is going, Judge, but I just want to be careful about going too far afield on unrelated matters. This was a paragraph that Mr. Keelty was showing him on direct, so I'm just not sure where we're going. I want to be careful. The court says, did you cross on it? Like, did you ask him questions about that? And Berkowitz says, I asked him to read it. The court says, okay. All right, so I guess. And Keelty says, yeah, Your Honor, I was just going to ask him if he believed that it was an unrelated matter. And Berkowitz says, well, I think that could be misleading, Judge, because it was both unrelated. And the court says, well, I kind of want to see where this goes a little bit. Let's see what you ask. You can ask him. This judge is I actually like this judge. He just lets it go. He lets it go pretty far, actually, I think. And if you don't push him on it, you lose the opportunity. And so Keelty's pushing him on it a little bit, and he's allowing it to go. Because remember, what happened is the prosecution actually blew this previously. The prosecution was going to try to push the line a little bit when they were impeaching Laura Seago, and DeFilippis didn't. That was early on in the trial. And so now they're pushing this a little bit further. You're seeing as the trial is sort of unfolding a little bit, they're sort of they're feeling their opponent out and what the judge is allowing to happen. And so he's allowing it to go a little bit, which is good. And he also let the tweet in. And so we're going to see. All right, so let's go on. All right, Mr. Keelty, blow that up. Read this 5 lines down. Can you read that? It says he mentioned that he had previously contacted FBI General Counsel Jim Baker. Did you have any impression about whether when Mr. Sussman said that he was referring to an unrelated matter? That's the question. I don't understand the question. Meaning, was it your understanding that Sussman had previously brought the Alpha Bank allegations to the FBI? Did you know that he brought this to them? He says, I don't know what the allegation was. It was similar and unrelated. Mr. Keelty says, okay, well, that's all. That was the question I had. The court let it come out. Not a big question. Court says, all right, thank you very much for your testimony. You are excused. Please don't discuss your testimony, and you're done. Get out of here. And so they are off the bench. Court says, all right, ladies and gentlemen, that's the conclusion of a long week, and I think very productive. You've earned your weekend off, he tells the jurors. Thank you for your attentiveness and your punctuality. You know the drill. No discussions about the case, no research about the case. Don't watch a YouTube channel about it. No contact with any social media or any other reporting about the case or any other surrounding issues. So have a great weekend, he says. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I understand, stay cool. We're out for some warm weather this weekend. Oh, give me a stinking break. Where are you, in D.C.? Ugh. Hot weather. I live in Arizona, buddy boy. It's going to be 116 soon. So we'll see you back here at 9 a.m. on Monday morning, and the jurors get booted out of there. So the court then says, be seated, and everybody stands for the jury as they exit, of course. So they sit down. Mr. DeFilippis, says Judge Cooper, what do we have for next week? Sorry, Your Honor, just one moment. Court says, sure. They're all fumbling papers around. Mr. Al Gore says, sorry, Your Honor. So we have potentially a conflict here with the next witness that we expect. We had expected to call, but we're going to try to figure that one out. But we had expected to call Trisha Anderson and then Bill Priestep, Ryan Gaynor, and then Allison Sands. And we know that we've got Bill Priestep and Trisha Anderson. These are going to be 2 interesting witnesses. Remember, they are, come on, move. This is these 2 people. We have both of their notes that were the subject of a lot of preliminary motions in limine, and so they're both going to be out. That was Trisha's notes. And then Bill Anderson notes look like this. This is where he said not doing this for any client. These were the notes that Jim Baker told them after his meeting with Michael Sussman. So they're going to be testifying on Monday, so that'll be good. Let's see here, Mr. Al Gore, Your Honor. And so Steve M., we don't intend to call now based on today's testimony. Steve M. was the other guy who wrote the portion of the transcript that Kevin was telling us that he was editing, right? So Steve M was the other person. We haven't cut anyone else yet. Court says, okay, Mr. Novick has recovered or no? Our understanding he's going to be able to travel on Monday, so we should be able to call him on Tuesday. So we've got more government witnesses at least through Tuesday. Berkowitz, the defense says, Your Honor, I just had 1 point before the weekend. I'm sure late last night you anxiously reviewed the government's response on a motion related to the New York Times. And we've been told by counsel for the New York Times that they'd like an opportunity to either reply or be heard. Court said, oh, yeah, I forgot about that. I was going to raise that. New York Times getting involved. Let's make sure we turn off our CIA secret agent. And we're now here with Judge Cooper. So he says, obviously, the issues are a little tricky. So I think if we haven't issued it yet, we will soon issue an order for a reply by Sunday evening. I'd like to take this up as soon as we can early next week. So it sounds like the government's going to be wrapping up Tuesday or Wednesday. Prosecutor says, I mean, we anticipate that, Your Honor. And judge says, I think we anticipate both you and the intervenor could be heard at some point once we get the reply. Berkowitz says, no shortage of tricky, fun issues in this case. And the court says, no, well, it does keep me on my toes. So they're having fun. Berkowitz says, you have a nice weekend. Court says, you all have a very nice weekend. Again, thanks for, working hard and cooperatively to get through this. I thought everything came in as well as could be expected. Berkowitz says, I appreciate it. And the prosecutors are like, whatever, judge, we're out of here. Court says, have a great weekend. Are you all traveling back home or sticking around? Prosecutor says, sticking around, Your Honor. And Berkowitz says, we're here for the duration. Court says, you'll finally get a DC summer weekend. Al Gore says, that's true. See you Monday. Thank you, Your Honor. And the proceedings conclude. That was on Friday. Signed off by the court reporter extraordinaire, Lisa Edwards. We have the best court reporters, don't we, folks? And that is the full transcript there. So that is trial day 5. That is the full day of the trial concluded, beginning morning and afternoon. And so on Monday, we'll have a lot more to get to. Sounds like the government will not be concluding until maybe Tuesday, maybe Wednesday. The defense probably going to have maybe a few witnesses, probably not a lot. And then maybe, I don't know if we're going to get a verdict. Is this going to get handed off to the jury by Friday? I don't know. We'll see. But that was the full week. We got a whole week under our belts reading through transcripts. And so I appreciate all of those super chats and your support. All of that is going, of course, to the transcripts. And so let's take a quick minute to run through some of those that came in today. Starting us off earlier was Anthony Henson with a dono for the transcript. Mary B. Sunshine, Rolf Peterson was a member, joined as a member. Welcome to Rolf Peterson. Kirk Sullivan said, appreciate your coverage. Very interested in Bill. We talked about that one from Kirk earlier. Maggie M's in the house. Thank you, Maggie, for that nice super chat transcript dono. Malamute Aerospace says, walking my dogs, getting some coffee in Monaco. That sounds like a beautiful day. Walking your dogs, getting some coffee. Kofefi. We have another one. Sheila Myers says, thanks for sharing. Thank you, Sheila. The Wandering Mariner with the dono says, for the transcripts, Rob, as usual, a job well done. Thank you, The Wandering Mariner. Another one from Malamute. We had Tori Dietrich with a nice super chat dono for the transcripts. Thank you, Tori. Malamute Aerospace with another one. Jim Carter's in the house with the transcript dono. Thank you, Jim. Very much appreciate that. Malamute says, bro, Lee Taylor in Phoenix, birthday is on 5/23. What? I don't know who that is. I don't want to read that birth date out. Is that a real person? Who is that person? I don't know who that is. That's from Malamute, who's giving a birthday shout out to somebody. 5/23. Who is Lee Taylor? Let's see who that is. Is that a famous person? Lee Taylor. Actress, appeared on stage, the most famous role. Retired actress. Saying Lee Taylor's birthday. Well, happy birthday to Lee Taylor on 5/23, whoever that happens to be. Not sure who that is. Hopefully it's a nice person. Diana Valdez with a very generous super chat transcript dono. Thank you for that, Diana. That's very useful, and it's all going to a good cause. We had another one from Conrad Roeder. Thank you, Conrad, for the transcript dono. We had a Zulu says, slow transcript fun day. Thanks for doing that for the fun. Thank you, Zulu. I appreciate it. It's nice to have you here. Yeah, the I finally got it clicked yesterday, the transcript cartel. I think you said this is against big transcript yesterday. And then K-Bean gave me the super comment yesterday, and I put it all together. Oh, that makes sense. Yes, the transcript cartels. Although, man, what they're peddling is good stuff. I had this transcript in my inbox today, and I was like, I really want to read this thing. It's CIA agents and everything. And so we were going to wait, maybe until tomorrow or sort of mash it in on Monday, but we had to talk about it. It's like burning a hole in my pocket. Those transcripts, man, those court reporters, boy, they got me hooked, baby. They got the good stuff, and I just can't help myself. All right, so that was from Zulu. Thank you, Zulu. Oliver Tractor is here, says, much appreciated, Robert. Thank you. I appreciate you back, Oliver Tractor. Corn Pops here says, 1 cent, I'm broke. We'll take it. And I think you gave more than 1 cent. You gave significantly more than that, Corn Pop. But Corn Pop, Sleepy Joe, thank you here for the super chat dono. Joseph Mills says, great contents. Thanks for the transcript fund. Thank you, Joseph Mills. And, this is going to be probably the end of the week will be done. But, this might be something we need to do for Steve Bannon. He's got a July trial, and maybe we can get the transcript for those. But it's kind of a fun little thing to do in lieu, because there's no way else to cover a federal trial. So we'll talk about it. Joseph Mills says, great content. Thank you, Joseph. Lynn Huston with the transcript dono. Thank you very much, Lynn. Appreciated. Bear Ashby says, not much, but thanks. It's plenty. Thank you so much. Right. Every little bit counts. Patricia Nab says, I appreciate what you do, Rob. I appreciate you back, Patricia. Thank you for that. That's also a very nice one, Patricia. And it's all going towards the transcripts. We've got Krista Bayer says, great work, Robert. Marvelous coverage of the great defense witness. I was amazed. More news from Oz. We just got a socialist government. Bad for business here. I saw a very interesting post on Twitter. Something about Oz. Is that where they're having... Let's see. I was thinking about where the World Economic Forum was happening. Anyways, I don't remember, but that's from Chris. Marvelous coverage. Thank you very much for that, Chris. We got a socialist government, bad for business here. Australia has been a fascinating place to watch for sure. So let's see here. I want to make sure we jump over and see what's going on locals. Shout out to locals. We've got Vientikis is over here. JC the Music Man's in the house, and I pulled up some comments from earlier. So we'll give some shout outs over on locals. And I posted the actual transcripts that we just ran through over there. Vientikis is yelling at me. He says, Rob, you hush with your Arizona heat and your swamp coolers and no snow and blah, 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 blah is what he says. It is hot here. It's getting hot, and it happens like quickly. It's like nice out, and then it's like scalding cauldron of death, and we're entering that phase. Monster One says, what, if anything, is something that you learn in law school? Amber Heard's lawyer got scolded for using it so much. What, if anything, is something you learn in law school? Is that something you learned in law school? So I don't know what happened with that trial or what she got scolded for. Or did she get scolded for objections? Somebody was getting scolded for objections. I really have not been following that trial at all. So it is hard for me to comment on that. But another one from Monster One says, you think the frustration came from him not wanting to eliminate himself while tripping over his dog and breaking his neck? Monster One is saying, do you think the reason why Michael Sussman may have been a little bit perturbed when he was meeting with some people like Mark Chadason is because he knew what was coming, that if he's walking up a flight of stairs, that he might be taken out by the Hillary Goon Squad? Could very well be a potential. I'm not sure, but it is funny. It does seem like they were really trying to paper over a pretty bad situation and freaking out about this, weren't they? We had a couple more come in. My 2 cents adjusted for Biden's inflation. That's a great comment. So Peg Leg Craig donated 2 cents, and it registers as $5 because money is worthless now because of Joe Biden's inflation. It's unfortunately maybe going that way. The current market economics not looking so good anywhere you look, or is it? Beth Coddington with a very generous dono, and I missed you, Beth, and I just knocked over a drink. That's how excited I got. Hello, Robert. Got a lot of catching up to do. Looking forward to it. Thank you for keeping it fun and interesting. And yeah, Beth, I mean, we got some serious content that came out this week. A lot of lives, A lot of heavy lifting, a lot of transcripts, but I am going to try to synthesize a lot of this into a highlight reel, like sort of a week one recap, to synthesize it down for people who don't have 3 hours to sit and talk through a lot of this. So I'm going to work on that tomorrow, but I needed to get the week one done before we can conclude week one and come up with some highlights. And I'm probably going to put together some shorts and stuff. So if you can't quite get through it all is what I'm saying, Beth, if it's too much, I'm going to be doing my best to get some highlight reels out tomorrow so that the people can get up to speed so that we can hit Monday ready to rock and roll. And brutally honest, Kanukistani, who's up there in Justin Trudeau's dictatorship, it says this is for the double costs of double spacing, which is another great point. These court reporters, they double space. What is this, like high school? I should probably check the margins too and the font size. Ridiculous. $1.20 a page. They're like, yeah, the 1 inch margins were, an inch, a 1.2. We're just going to make them 1.2, maybe a 1.1 on the top. We're going to make it, rather than a 10 point, we're going to bump that up to an 11 point, the width a little bit here and there. I get it. Double space, maybe a 2.1 space, 2.2 spaces. You turn 150 pages into 197 pages. Unbelievable. It's a great point, brutally honest. And I don't know if that's happening or not, but I don't think that it is. I actually think they're all really a lot of fun to actually even communicate with. They've all been absolutely great. There are 3 different court reporters I'm working with. We've got 2 Lisas and a Lorraine. There's a morning Lisa, an afternoon Lisa, and Lorraine. And they're all just been they've all been great actually, and pretty funny too. So shout out to the court reporters. We got the best court reporters. We have Malamute Aerospace with another super chat, but very much appreciate all of you being here with us today. We're going to leave it there. We're going to be back here on Monday. I am going to do some pre-recorded stuff tomorrow so that we can get some of the headlines and stuff under our belts. But I want to thank you for being a part of the show today. Really, really appreciate the transcript donos, because it's, like I said, we would not be able to do this without that. There would be nothing to read through because they are quite expensive, and it is very, very helpful. And I'm having a lot of fun going through them with you. I hope you are too. If you enjoyed the content, I'd love it if you shared it with somebody, just invited them on over here. If you go on YouTube and you try to search for Sussman, I've done this like 3 times throughout the course of this trial. It's all the mainstream news sources before you ever even see anything that we're talking about here. It's quite frustrating. But fortunately, we are getting, a lot of positive feedback, and it's because of you sharing it. And I really do appreciate it. I think it's important stuff. Share the mind map, share the transcripts. More eyeballs on this, the better. I think that this is how we memorialize this nefariousness. Make sure that it is documented for future generations, because these people just keep bouncing around, right? This is not the end of this crew. Once this trial is over, every single one of these people is going to be continuing to act as Democratic operatives in all of the forthcoming elections. Like, these people are not going away. They're going to be around forever. And we're going to have to continue to follow them as all of this unfolds. And I appreciate your support as we continue to do that. But that, my friends, is it for us for the day. It's Saturday. Hope you have an amazing rest of your evening. Thank you so much for joining on the show. One more reminder to subscribe before you get out of here. Have a tremendous evening. And I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Bye-bye, my friends.